Well, good morning. It's great to see you this morning. Glad that you're here. Why don't you go ahead and open your Bibles to the book of Ecclesiastes. And if I remember correctly, in your Pew Bible in front of you, if you didn't bring a Bible with you, there should be a Pew Bible there. I think it's page 477. That'll certainly get you close if it doesn't get you right there. As you're turning, let me remind you of two things that are on the schedule for this week. Here at East Valley Bible Church. Several years ago, we listened to many of you, and what we heard was, summer's kind of a time when some of our small groups kind of shut down, and is there something we can do for the summer? And so last year, our response to that was hot summer nights. And the whole idea of that, if you look at the calendar of that now, there's a hot summer night this week, and then every, I guess that would be Tuesday, through this month. And that's just an opportunity for us to come together, basically around a topic. I'll talk about each one of them each week by way of introduction. But this week we're going to talk about a reality that is becoming more and more real for us. And it's this, that we sit here on this campus. If you go that way 3 or 4 miles, you're in a barrio. If you go this way, you are in one of the most dangerous zip codes in the county. Yet you can go this way and you have a very middle class to upper middle class residents. The second largest town with a black population is Chandler. We live in a very diverse culture, and the church is beginning, and I am grateful for that, beginning to represent that culture. But that brings some interesting things into the mix as we worship God, as we study His Word. So Will Gant's going to join me this Tuesday night. Join us, will you, as we talk just about this world and this culture we live in and some of the issues that we face culturally, ethnically, all sorts of diversity and challenge. So I checked, American Idol's not on. There's no Dancing with the Stars. So why don't you get here a little early, grab a sandwich, and we'll be over in the Commons at 7 o'clock. Also, one of the things we heard was we would love to get together sometime for fun, just for fun. No worship, no teaching, fun. And we said, absolutely not. We're against, no. We said, that'd be great. What would that be? And then last year at the marriage retreat that we had Tim Hawkins with us, and he was fun. So we made arrangements for Tim to come and join us. So this Saturday, a couple of shows with him, and just designed to be absolutely fun. If you got some people there in the neighborhood, or you as a small group looking for something to do, come and join us. Tickets are available over in the office. Grab them if you will. I was not here last week. I was at Forest Home, which is a Christian conference center. Go over to Redlands, make a right, and go up into the mountains about 15 miles or so. And we had really an interesting time over there. I ended up working a little bit harder than I had anticipated. I took a bunch of books to read. I did not get through them, even started on a lot of what I had planned. Spent more than normal time with people who just wanted to talk. And a lot of hurt, a lot of pain that we're finding in life right now, and that might have been representative of that. So I had a great time. I had no internet, no cell phone, no television, no air conditioning, and the outside temperature was 97. I mean, I'm roughing it. This is what the founding fathers experienced. When I was there, by the way, I went through the DVDs of the HBO series on John Adams, and it just there's a bunch of things coming together in my mind that are just reminding me that we are a little bit wimpy, and that our forefathers paid a huge, and I know it's almost like a cliche to say it, but they paid a huge price so we could get together on the 4th of July and have hot dogs and hamburgers. And when you listen and look and read and study, it is amazing. George Washington, during the Revolutionary War, a little up and during it, a little bit after, in an 8-year period, he spent 1 day at Mount Vernon. He spent 1 day at home. These people paid huge price. And it would probably do us well to understand that. I met a gentleman this morning who's about to be deployed this Thursday and back overseas again. And these people are all around us, and they are making, and again, as I know it's a cliche, but they are making a huge sacrifice so that we can have the freedoms that we have. I think it's important that we remember that. And remember a little bit of what they all had in mind, those founding fathers, as they were willing to give their lives, certainly suffered a great deal so that we could be here. and celebrate that. So I ask you to keep that in your mind. It feels heavy to me recently for probably a variety of reasons. Speaking of heavy, welcome to the book of Ecclesiastes and the 4th chapter. And let me remind you of our reference point. Solomon is on this quest to try to experience all the pleasure he can in life. And indeed, he denies himself nothing. He gives us the finding of his research at the very beginning of the book. Chapter 1, verse 2, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What advantage does a man have in all his work, which he does under the sun? He said, literally, life is meaningless under the sun. And that phrase, under the sun, means life without God, life without Christ. If I want to live in this life apart from Him, no matter what I pursue, and again, what you need to understand is He's not a loser. He's a winner. He got what he set out to achieve, and he says it's empty. Now, at the same time, Solomon tells us that to enjoy life, to be satisfied with our life and our work, is a gift from God. So indeed, God has designed it so we can find a sense of satisfaction in this life and even a sense of contentment in this life, but it needs to be within its proper perspective. I need to begin to see it as God sees it, and I need to begin to understand His eternal perspective, not my limited horizontal view. What we're going to look at today is chapter 4, beginning in verse 4, and through the completion of chapter 5. And Psalm's going to talk about 3 things for us. He's going to talk about work. He's going to talk about the advantage of companionship or teamwork. And then he's going to talk about the futility, the vanity, the meaninglessness of stuff. So we're going to look at those 3 things here this morning. Beginning in chapter 4, verse 4, and through the end of that chapter, he's talking about work, and then he puts in there, adds to that in verse 12, this discussion on companionship, or maybe teamwork, even if we leave it in the concept or in context of work. He bookends this in verse 4 with, this is meaningless. It's like striving under the wind. Verse 16, this too is meaningless, or vanity. It's like striving after the wind. He's talking about work, and he said, you may have all sorts of motivations for your labor, but he said, as I looked around, I saw people driven by 3 motives. Verses 4 through 6, the motive is envy or jealousy or pride. Verses 7 through 12, the motive is greed. And then verses 13 through 16, he talks specifically about this idea of prestige, that we strive for advancement or prestige, ambition in the wrong sense of the word. Look at verse 4. He said, I've seen that every labor and every skill which is done is the result of rivalry between a man and his neighbor. This too is vanity and striving after the wind. The fool folds his hand and consumes his own flesh. One hand full of rest is better than 2 fists full of labor and striving. He said, I look around first and I see one of the driving motives for labor or work is this idea of rivalry with a neighbor, jealousy, envy. The thought behind it is keeping up with the Joneses, but it's even deeper than that. Does that phrase even ring familiar with anyone anymore? The old idea of keeping up with the Joneses? It basically says we're motivated by the people around us, and we look at them, and we want to keep pace with whatever it is they're doing, acquiring, achieving in their life. And Solomon says it's even deeper than that. We have a desire not just to keep up with the Joneses, but we really have the desire that the Joneses would be looking at us and say, we're going to keep up with them. There is a wonderful heavyweight fighter whose name was Larry Holmes, and he unfortunately was kind of sandwiched in this time with Joe Frazier, Muhammad Ali, and George Foreman, and just some great fighters. Holmes was a wonderful fighter, but just struggled for kind of an identity in the midst of that. Wonderful athlete, wonderful boxer. He lived in Easton, Pennsylvania. And Larry Holmes said, in Easton, Pennsylvania, the Joneses keep up with the Holmeses. And what he's acknowledging is this reality that we kind of set this bar. What are they doing? Where do they live? What do they wear? Where do their kids go to school? It becomes very competitive. So life becomes competitive really in an unhealthy way. And again, not just keeping pace with the guy next door, but having that person next door and taking some sort of satisfaction that they're looking at us and saying, we want to keep up with them. It becomes very competitive, doesn't it? I was in the kind of the early throes of my real estate career and was starting to do pretty well. And that presented a huge problem for me. And that was, how could I let everyone know that I was successful? It's a little awkward, isn't it? I thought it was clumsy to walk around with a, ask me about being in the top 10 sticker. And then I realized that we kind of understand success based by either where people live or what they drive or what they write with. That was huge then. If you had a certain type of pen, then that connoted success. And the other thing that really got people's attention was the right watch. Now, I don't like jewelry. I don't like stuff around me. I've never worn a watch. That's not totally true. I did, and I'll share that with you sometime. But I was cured of that. But I hated wearing a watch. But if you had this certain kind of watch, very large watch, very expensive watch, if you had that just screamed success. So I went and took a look at a few of those and thought, that just doesn't fit me. I've got to figure this out. And then I came up with an ingenious idea. I'll get one of those for Susan. Then when we all go to dinner, I'll say, sweetheart, what time is it? And then you can go, well, on my brand new, I don't know if you all saw this big expensive $15,000 watch that Tom bought me, and then I realized I'm too cheap to spend the money on that. I'll just let him figure it out some other way. But that's exactly what Solomon is talking about. There's something in us. Something in us that when we see other people with stuff, we become envious and jealous. And then something in us that says, you know what, I want to even create that in them because I want them to begin to strive to be like me. But of course, as Christians, we don't have that. At Forest Home, every person, without exception, there was no exception to this, every person said to me, oh, you're in a church. You pastor a church. And then every one of them, without exception, had the same first question. What was it? How many people go to that church? And if I said 4,000, 45, ooh, if I said 200, they go, who invited this loser over here to speak? I mean, it's like somehow size matters in that context. And some of the great men of God, just so you know this, some of the great men of God are laboring in some of these churches that frankly just don't have as many resources as we do. They're smaller churches, and you should be praying for these guys all the time. That's tough sledding. But that's just how we're wired. That's what he's saying. Verse 5, he said, some just give up. A fool folds his hand and consumes his own flesh. One of the paraphrases says, the fool sits back, takes it easy, and his sloth is slow suicide. In either case, he says it doesn't really matter. It's better to have one handful and have rest than have twice as much, but in the midst of it is striving and anxious stress. Again, the context of work. He said, I saw something else. Verse 7, I looked again at the vanity under the sun. There's a certain man without a dependent, having neither a son nor a brother, yet there was no end to his labor. Indeed, his eyes were not satisfied with riches, and he never asked, and for whom am I laboring? And depriving himself of pleasure. This too is meaningless. He said, I looked around and I saw this guy. There wasn't a single solitary person in his life. No kids, no family, no friends. And yet he is working and working. He's obsessively working. He can't stop. Or she can't stop. Can't shut it off. And there's, to me, just a wonderful idea tucked in here. It's the repetitive idea, we'll come back to it when we get over to chapter 5, that I'm never satisfied. But this person never stops to take inventory. Do you see that little phrase in verse 8? He never asks, why am I doing this? It was Socrates that said the unexamined life is not worth living. One of the things that is absolutely essential for us to be able to really benefit from this study in the book of Ecclesiastes is that you have to apply this to your life. I can take some shots at it, and Solomon gives us a whole bunch of these, and he continues to come in a variety of ways. But the whole point of this is for you to feel a certain heaviness, a certain weight. And it moves you not to the point of despair and depression, but it moves you to the point of action. That you stop and say, oh my gosh, that resonates with me. That's me. I do a whole bunch of things. I've got a whole closet full of stuff that I bought based on somebody else looking at it and saying, he must be successful. I live in a house that I chose, not because I even like it that much, but because it's in the right neighborhood. And people who are somebody live there. That's why I drive this car. And it drives us to all sorts of silly behavior. And he said, here's a real fool. This guy's got nobody to leave it to. Again, I know this is a little bit dated, but you know who it makes me think of? Is there any guy that comes into your mind when you think of this guy that's working and getting it, but he has really nobody to leave it to? Is there anybody that comes into your mind? Howard Hughes. That's exactly what I thought of. This poor, pathetic creature that dies in an airplane, who sat really in his own human waste, who had all the money you could imagine. And he never stops and takes an inventory. That's what you and I need to do. It's a thoughtful life. So often, we are seeing more and more. By the way, now what we're seeing as many women leave their husbands as husbands leave their wives. Like in the old days, it was always the guy that was a jerk and now he would leave. But you've come a long way, baby, and you're a jerk too. And we're seeing marriages that are beginning to experience divorce after 30, 35 years. You know what's happening? For 35 years, she's hung in there and been miserable. But now the kids are raised and I'm out of here. We'll see people that go off and all of a sudden do this major left turn in their life. And all of a sudden, one morning they woke up and they asked themselves a question that we need to be asking ourselves on a regular, frequent basis. And that is, why are we doing this? Why in the world are we doing this? Why am I sitting in this traffic? We live here in hell itself. 175 degrees or whatever it is. You can hardly breathe out there this morning. Why am I doing this? Why am I driving an hour and a half sitting here moving? Why am I doing this? For a little bit of what? And there's something in your life, there's a meaninglessness there. This really resonates with many of you. Why am I in this thing called the rat race? Can I just get to the point where I say, okay, the rats win, now what? Where do we go now with this? And then he just heaps this on. You want Solomon to kind of ease off the gas, but he doesn't. He just pulls this at you. Now he gives you a little bit of a reprieve here in verse 9. In that he says, let me give you a tip. And that is teamwork. It's in the context maybe here of labor, but certainly in life you can get the principles, put them together. That teamwork or companionship has a huge advantage. He names 4 of them. Verse 9. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. There's a good yield there. When I go back to my old Coldwell Banker office and I go in, one of the things that's different now, when I was there, we all worked kind of by ourselves. There were a couple of teams that were formed, but basically everybody worked by themselves. Now, almost everyone is involved in a team. Why? Well, one of the driving reasons is you're going to make more money. There's a higher yield. You can get more done. You can cover more bases. Here's the second thing. He said, if either of them falls, the one will lift up his companion, but woe to the one who falls when there is not another to lift him up. In the vernacular of our day, he's saying, somebody's got your backside. Somebody's got you covered. I was at my desk yesterday and had just a little breather, and I was waiting for Lawrence Welk to come on last night. We had some technical difficulty. Did you notice that during Lawrence Welk last night? We had technical difficulties on a couple of times, key times in the show. But I was waiting for Lawrence Welk to come on. And so one of my favorite things now is to go on YouTube and look at things that like old Bob Newhart's and just things I love. And I hadn't heard President Reagan's voice in a while, and I always find great courage in listening to him. So I kind of Googled some stuff. And he was telling the story about Inauguration Day. And they were standing in the back, you know, the scene where they walk out into the visible daylight where everyone can see them. And he's standing back there with Howard Baker. And Howard Baker said, "Governor," he's not yet Mr. President, "Governor, I want you to know that I'm with you in thick." And Reagan said, "What about thin?" And Baker said, "Welcome to Washington." And I thought of this verse. I had just done going over my notes. I thought of the verse. I got your backside. I know you got me covered. There are about 500 million things that I love about Susan. One of the things that I find most endearing is that she's got my backside. I trust her with anything. In 30 years, she's never done one thing slightly to break that trust. I have lunch on most Fridays with Jerry Smith, and we've done this for years. And a few years ago, he said one of the greatest things that's ever been said to me in my life. He said, "In all the time that I've talked with you, I've never heard you say one bad thing about Susan, nor will you." Now, we say a lot of bad things to each other, but it's none of your business. Yeah. That was at hot summer nights last year. One of the first question in the Q&A is, "What do you think of Tom's hair?" And I don't know if you remember her answer, but she was not very politically correct. She personally doesn't like it, but she said, "It's really none of your business where he wears his hair. You just need to know how much he loves you, and if his hair is bothersome to you, you got problems, not him." Which is why we don't. By the way, that's why we don't let her out a whole lot. I'm the soft one in the family, and I've always been that. She's got my backside. Verse 11, "Furthermore, if two lie down together, they can keep warm, but how does one keep warm alone?" He said there's some practical advantages here too. There's nothing better on a really, 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 really cold kind of winter night here, which we do get, remember? To get into bed and now the sheets are cold and go, "Ooh, we need to spoon at least till I'm warm." Okay? And by yourself, you're just sitting there. And he says, in verse 12, there's more likely a success. If one can overpower him who's alone, two can resist him, and a cord of 3 strands is not quickly torn apart. Boy, one, you might overpower him, but 2, they got a shot. And if you put 3 in there, they're really going to defend themselves. If you take a marriage and you've got Susan and you got me and you've got Christ in the middle of that, that's a tough cord to break. That's the advantage of this companionship. And he's driving it home again and again and again and again and again. You need people in your life. Just in a pragmatic way. You can't fulfill the Great Commission or the Great Commandment without having people involved in your life. Now, even with all these, he's still saying you're going to come up empty. Ray Stedman writes this: "While there are advantages to companionship, nevertheless, the preacher," he's talking about Solomon, "the preacher's argument is still that it adds up to emptiness. It does not satisfy the sense of eternity that God puts in our hearts. Many a couple sit in loneliness, staring at television screens for hours at a time, or seek other diversions to fulfill emptiness and misery in their life. No companionship, though better than loneliness, it's not the answer either." Then he talks a bit about prestige. Let me just read you a paraphrase of verse 13 through 16. "A poor youngster with some wisdom is better off than an old foolish king who doesn't know which end is up." It's better to be poor and even young, if I'm wise, than to have all the riches and still be a fool. "I saw a youth," verse 14, just like this, start with nothing and go from rags to riches. And I saw everyone rally to the rule of this young successor to the king. Verse 16, even so, the excitement died quickly and the throngs of people soon lost interest. Can't you see it's only smoke and spitting in the wind? He said, I saw people who even achieved great things, but you know what? Once you come to the memorial service, and we get that done, you're going to go back to the house and have some baked beans and some coleslaw, some ham, some cookies, some awful red punch. You're then going to go home and essentially forget the person that you just buried. That's what he's saying. Not everybody, but we don't remember much. I have this thing I used to do where I read off the names of men who were vice president of the United States and no one's ever heard them. I was trying to think the other day who won and you don't need to call it out, who won the Final Four this year. Was it Memphis? But I had to stop and I had to take an inventory. I mean, do you remember Big Brown was going to be the horse forever here and finish last? I mean, we have no sense of history at all. No sense of what went before us. And there were these people of enormous consequence at their time. Again, I'm stuck a little bit right now in the revolutionary period. These people have enormous consequence at their time and you don't remember them. There's people who gave their life to translating Bibles. Gave their lives to the preservation of your faith. God used them in mighty ways. We don't know who they are. We just call them the saints of old and we're happy with that. Look at chapter 5 verse 1. And 2. Guard your steps as you go into the house of God and draw near to listen rather than to offer sacrifice of fools, for they do not know what they're doing is evil. Do not be hasty in word or impulsive in thought to bring a matter into the presence of God. For God is in heaven and you are on earth. Therefore, let your words be few. You thought Matt Redman wrote that. Here's what he's saying. He's God. Let him be God. Understand him as God. He is so far beyond you and beyond me. So often we seem frustrated that we cannot comprehend all that he is or all that he does or why would he do this or why would he do that. He's God. And I am very comfortable with my inadequacy to answer those why questions. But let me tell you what I do know. I do know he loves his people. I do know he is concerned about you and I growing and maturing to be men and women and children, students. They grow into deep relationship with him. Why would he allow these things to take place? Well, for his own good and ultimately for our own good. He says in verse 1, listen. How do I listen? Well, I read this word. God speaks to me through this word. J.C. Ryle wrote these words. The book, the Bible, contains the mind of God, the state of man, the way of salvation, the doom of sinners, the happiness of believers. The doctrines is holy, its precepts are binding, its histories are true, its decisions are immutable. Read it to be wise, believe it to be safe, practice it to be holy. It contains light to direct you, food to support you, comfort to cheer you. It's the traveler's map, the pilgrim's staff, the pilot's compass, the soldier's sword, the Christian's character. Read it slowly and frequently and prayerfully. It is a mine of wealth, a health to the soul, a river of pleasure. Have to listen to him. R.C. Sproul writes these words, if you wish to know God, you must know his word. If you wish to perceive his power, you must see how he works through his word. Psalm 119, longest chapter we have in the scripture, is all about our search, the psalmist taking us back to the word of God. Happy are the people of integrity who follow the law of the Lord. That's how he begins this psalm. Let me read you some excerpts of this. Verse 33. Teach me, O Lord, to follow every one of your precepts. Give me understanding. I'll obey your law. I will put it into practice. Verse 47. How I delight in your commandments. How I love them. Verse 52. I meditate on your age-old laws, O Lord. Comfort me. Verse 89, forever, O Lord, your word stands firm in heaven. Your faithfulness extends to every generation. Verse 97, oh, how I love your law. I think about it all day long. Your commandments make me wiser than my enemies, for your commandments are my constant guide. Yes, I have more insight than my teachers, for I'm always thinking of your decrees. Verse 105, your word is a lamp for my feet, a light for my path. Verse 125, give me discernment. Verse 129, your decrees are wonderful. God is sovereign. That's what he's saying. Let your words be few. He's God. You're not. He's in heaven and has a perspective of this world. And you know what? This is the phrase I've been using a lot lately. And he's a micromanager. Now, we typically don't like that in business. I don't like the idea of me, even in whatever area of authority I have, being a micromanager. I'm not attracted to that. But God's a micromanager. He's not a distant God. He's not aloof and removed. He has the hairs on your head numbered and sees the sparrows fall. And everything that comes into your life, he either causes or allows it. He's never surprised. He never goes, oh my gosh, I didn't know. He's not reevaluating his precepts. A timeless God has not produced for us dated material. He's taught us indeed how we are to live, and he says there's going to be some of those situations where you, frankly, just keep your mouth shut except to pray and believe him and trust him. That's what faith is, isn't it? 3 or 4 months ago, I recommended the book The Reason for God by Tim Keller, and World Magazine just selected it as the book of the year. And they have an interview with Keller, and one of the questions they ask is, when you're told that meaningless suffering and pointless evil show that God is non-existent or confused, how do you respond? And Keller says this, the problem with saying that suffering is meaningless is that it assumes your vantage point is the ultimate vantage point. One of the problems is that from our vantage point, most suffering looks meaningless. Sometimes, when you get the perspective, you look back and you realize that something was accomplished there. Here's what he's saying. You're in the midst of this and you're assuming you have the best view, the authoritative view, and you don't. Isaiah 55, verse 8 and 9. My thoughts are higher than your thoughts. My ways are higher than your ways, says the Lord. Let God be God. One of the wonderful things about East Valley Bible Church is that we teach the sovereignty of God, not just as it relates to salvation, but it's truly who he is. That everything in our life goes through his grid. That he does as he pleases. He is restricted only by his own character of justice and mercy and love. So that even in our life, as we look at it, and we're going to go, why would he? And I understand that there are many questions, powerful questions. I mean, if you're back in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, you're back in my home area, Iowa City, and down in there, they've lost 20 to 25% of their crop for this year. Huge devastation. There was a classic picture that I saw on the internet of a bridge. I don't know if you saw it. And there were like 3 dozen houses that are now stuck under this bridge. Why would God allow that? I don't know. But he's God. And I don't have to wonder. I don't have to try to be God. I can just relax and rest and find comfort that he's in control. Even if that doesn't always turn out exactly the way I'd like. When you get to chapter 5, verse 10, he talks about stuff. So I got about 15 minutes left. So I want to spend some time on this. Look at verse 10. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its income. This is vanity. When good things increase, those who consume them increase. So what advantage is there to the owner except to look on? The sleep of the working man is pleasant, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich man doesn't allow him to sleep. There is a grievous evil which I've seen under the sun, riches being hoarded by their owner to his hurt. When those riches were lost through bad investment, and he fathered a son, then there was nothing to support him. And then kind of the summary statement, as he had come from his mother's womb, so he will return as he came. He'll take nothing from the fruit of his labor that he can carry in his hand. There's some powerful statements in there. Look at verse 10. Whoever loves money never has money enough. Here's what he's saying. The more you have of it, if you love it, the more you'll want it. It's the same idea that Paul teaches us in 1 Timothy 6:10. The love of money. Do you see what he's saying there? He's not talking about money in and of itself as evil. He's talking about our love for it. He said if you love money, if you're money driven, if you're driven by stuff, if you're one of the normal, natural, thinking people in this world, then if you love it, you'll never have enough. The second part of verse 10, whoever loves wealth is never satisfied. There's never a satisfaction with it. The more you have, the less you're satisfied. I've watched study after study, and they always go something like this. They ask people, how much money would it take to be happy? They give them categories. And those making $40,000 to $50,000 a year say 60. Those making 60 say 75. Those making 75 say 100. Those making 100 say 100 and a quarter. Those making 100 and a quarter say 100 and a half. Those making 100 and a half say 200. I spent some time with a guy years ago. This is when we were going through this in the 80s. It was a tough time like this. And he said, I'm really struggling. I have cut everything. I've cut everything there is to cut. I've got my expenses down to bare bone. And I figure I need right at 10 grand a month. 120 a year. And that's the principle. Because you and I go, wow, and he means it. He's saying, listen, I've cut out a lot of stuff here. Verse 11, he said, as goods increase, so do those who consume them. Here's what he's saying, the more you have, the more people come along and help you spend it. The more there'll be people around who are grabbing at you. When I do the pro athletes conferences, one of the things that these guys struggle with almost always is that they come from modest means, they have a big signing bonus, and everybody's lined up at the door with their hand up. Everybody's there for their share of this deal. And if they don't come, then you'll consume them. Talk about that more in a minute. Verse 12, the sleep of the laborer is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of a rich man permits him no sleep. The more you have, the more you worry about it. He said the hourly guy, he gets done and swings by Circle K and gets a big gulp and Filiberto's and gets a 4-pound burrito, and he goes home and he just kind of scratches and watches Raymond and goes to sleep. He's happy. Everything's fine. But the guy that owns the shop, he's worried. He's there. Even with his home, he's wondering if the alarm system's working. Did we leave the air conditioning on? And the more of this stuff I get, the more I spend time trying to protect it. He said, verse 13, I've seen another grievous thing, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owner. The more you have, the more you hurt yourself holding on to it. It's not just a matter of accumulation and acquiring. Now it's, here you go, preserving my assets. I years ago read a book called The Number, and here's what it was. And it's prudent. Planning is prudent, by the way. The question was, how much money do you need to retire? And so I've been thinking and working a lot about that. And I have this number. Now, it's all predicated on $2 gas. So I've come to the realization that I'm going to be sitting here teaching for a long, and I'm not going to get out of here. There's no end to this. He said, oh, wealth through your misfortune. He said in verse 14, the more you have, the more you just lose. And then this summary phrase, I came in naked, I'm leaving naked. I can't take anything with me. The more money you have, the more you're leaving behind. It's that same old thing, how much money did Howard Hughes leave? All of it. It's that same old idea. No, you haul behind a hearse. You know these truths, don't you? But you need to come back to them again and again and again. Can I go a little bit deeper here? A couple of surveys. I cannot afford to buy everything I really need. People making 75 to 100 grand, 40% of them said that statement's true. Those making 100 grand, 27% of them said it's true. I can't afford to buy the things I really need. How about this? I spend nearly all my money on the basic necessities of life. 35% of people making 75 to 100 grand said that. Most making more than 100 grand, 20%, 1 out of 5 said, I'm spending every dime I have just on food. Now, you know what's interesting? In 1900, 43% of a family's budget was spent on food. 43% of your income spent on food. In the year 2000, it was 15%. It's a little more than that now, but it's still a fraction of what it was. How can this be? Well, Radio Shack gave us the answer. They ran a whole advertising campaign with this phrase: we have thousands of things you never knew you needed. You didn't know you needed this. I thought I just needed a phone. Oh, no. It has to be able to brew coffee now. I mean, I'm watching more cell phones go off. And you know what it is? It's all old people like me who have you now have these cell phones, because everybody's got one, and you don't know how to turn it off. You used to have one. I used to have a cell phone. I could just turn it off. I don't know this. This thing is talking to me and texting me and sending me messages. My phone wished me happy 4th of July the other day. I don't know if somebody sent me that or if the phone has its own mind. I don't know. It just started shaking the other day and said happy 4th of July. All I want to do is call out. I don't even want to get incoming calls. You didn't know you needed that. One sociologist looked at his data, collected it. Here's his conclusion. We are soaring materially, yet we've doubled the divorce rate from 40 years ago, tripled the teen suicide rate, quadrupled juvenile violence, quintupled the number of babies being born to unmarried parents. And we have all this stuff. We've never had stuff like we do now. I don't care if you are in the poor. You're at the bottom of this middle class. You still have a bunch of TVs. You still have 150 channels and nothing to watch. That's what Susan and I sat down the other day, and she said, there's nothing to watch. I said, that's physically impossible. There has to be something to watch. Honestly, our channels go all the way into 700s now. I said, there has to be something to watch. And I went from channel 1, which is Cox Info, to channel 744, which is the health food, and there was nothing to watch. Let me give you some alarming statistics. We have about $700 billion in non-mortgage consumer debt right now. 10% of the credit cards in the country are in the hands of teenagers. There's enough credit cards in the country for every man, woman, boy, or girl to have 4 of them. The savings rate is the lowest it's been since the Great Depression. I'm going to give you 2 statistics that to me just make me look into the future and say, we got some serious issues here. Roughly 15% of high school students, 50% of high school students, 1 out of 2, will not graduate. Did you get that? 50% of high school students aren't going to graduate. What are they going to do in a high-tech, high-information age? The literacy rate in the state of Massachusetts was higher at the time of John Adams than it is now. That's one statistic that is alarming. Here's the other one. For every $1 increase in household income, spending is going up $1.10. How are you going to get out of this? And to buy things you don't need. And I'm not a killjoy, by the way. I'm not anti-material. I'm just anti-materialism. I'm driving back from Forest Home on July 4th morning, and I'm in Blythe getting gas. Okay? And there's an Albertsons there. I need to go to the restroom. Sorry to be, but even I have to go sometimes. I didn't think he went. And so there's an Albertsons. So I figure, well, they'll have a restroom in there. And I am not exaggerating. Every checkout line was open. I've never been in a grocery store or even at Christmas in a department store like this. And there had to be a dozen people in every line. And you know what? Every case had in it, every shopping cart had a 24 pack of Bud Light. They must sell no beer but Bud Light at Albertsons and Blythe. And getting off into one of these trucks that are the size of a semi, and then complaining about the price of gas. Well, you bought a vehicle, which you financed. You were upside down the minute you drove it off the lot, and it gets 3.5 gallons a mile, and you're whining about the cost of gas? See, everything's starting to come home. And you know what? This is cool. It's good. It's good. These are good things. Because they're causing me, I think Susan and I are fairly restrictive in this way, but it's causing us to look at it and say, you know what, maybe we don't need the temperature at 77. Let's put it at 79. Maybe we can drive this car another 2 or 3 years. We don't need to go out. Come on, are you kidding me? Just because it's somebody's birthday, we can do stupid stuff in terms of where we go and spend money. These are wonderful times. And it's what Solomon said. Can you get any fresher than this? This is like it's today's newspaper. Solomon said it's always been that way, and it's always going to be that way. The only way to break this cycle is supernatural intervention. If you're here today and you're going, you know what, I'm just frustrated, and you don't know Christ, you're never going to be anything but frustrated. Because your fundamental problem is spiritual. The more you make, the more you spend. It's never enough. So then, I'm the other day having lunch, and I don't know, there's like 8 of us there. 5 of these guys are ready to move to Montana. I wouldn't go to Montana in a million years. Everybody up there is just miserable people who move from somewhere else to go to Montana. They must all be miserable up there. I want to get out of the rat race. Now there's one road in and out of town with 500 cars on it. It's like going to Prescott. You're just running away. The problem's you. It's a proper perspective. One of my favorite verses in Scripture is 2 Timothy 2:4. No soldier in active duty entangles himself in the affairs of everyday life, so he may please the one who enlisted him. Thinking about that verse, Jim Elliot, at age 20, wrote these words. I've been musing lately on the extremely dangerous cumulative effect of earthly things. One may have good reason, for example, to want a wife, and he may have one legitimately, but with a wife comes Peter the pumpkin eater's proverbial dilemma. He must find a place to keep her. And most wives will not stay on such terms as Peter proposed. So a wife demands a house in turn requires curtains, rugs, washing machine, etc. A house with these things must soon become a home, and children the intended outcome. Now, listen to this phrase. If you got nothing else out of today, think about this. The needs multiply as they're met. Now, that's counterintuitive. We think we have a need, we meet it, we're done. He said, no. We meet a need, and in the meeting of the need, we create all these other needs. The needs multiply as they're met. A car demands a garage land, a garden, tools, and tools need to be sharpened. Woe to the man who would live a disentangled life in my century. 2 Timothy 2:4 is almost impossible in the United States. I've learned the wisest life is the simple one, lived in the fulfillment of only the basic requirements of life: shelter, food, covering, and a bed. With these we can become productive of other needs if we are not careful. Be on guard, O my soul, of complicating your environment so you have neither time nor room for spiritual growth. It's those things in life. Let me give you a great example. Yesterday, I had my day all planned out. Somewhat unbeknownst to me, at noon, in came Tyler and Haley, Braden and Yale, Timmy and Sarah, and Gracie and Reagan. And they came to go swimming. Now, I don't know if you know much about swimming pools, but most of them are outside. I have a swimming pool I've never been in since we've owned the house. I have no need for it because it's outside. And so when we came in, I took Reagan, so Reagan's 2 months old, so I'm trying to get her settled. And they're going to go out and they're going to try to figure out how to swim and get the kids in there, which is great. And so I got Reagan in her chair and Susan's feeding Yale, so I'm out trying to help them. And then I went back in and she said, why don't you feed Yale? And I stuck the spoon up there and I said, that isn't working. Why don't you feed Yale? And I went out and kicked the ball to them and brought them chips and salsa and cheese. Hotter than snot. They're in the pool. And they left and I thought, you know what? There's 3 hours I didn't plan, and I don't remember what I had planned, but it couldn't have sniffed the value of that moment. This morning when I came in, I went on Sarah's blog. I check her blog all the time. I don't know how she's got time to blog. I checked the blog, and there were the pictures from yesterday and all the things from yesterday, and a thank you to me and her mom. I got an email this morning from Haley. I'm sure these two did not collaborate on this. Email from Haley saying, I know all that stuff was a hassle, and I know we were there on the 4th, and I know we were there yesterday. We had a great weekend, and that's why, because you guys opened your house. That's what life is all about. That's the stuff that's important. And you need to examine your life. And if I can get you on the front end, if you're on the front end of this thing, boy, you're not yet married or just married. I want you to know what my friends are doing. My friends are downsizing. Can I suggest this to you? Don't ever upsize. Put 2 kids in a bunk bed. You don't need your own office in the house. You don't need that swimming pool. And I speak to this with biblical authority and personal authority. The time, the energy, the effort, the money to maintain those things is not worth it. No one's going to care. I can just tell from yesterday was a big deal in my kid's life. And you know what it meant? It meant me setting aside my own agenda and serving them. You can't be a parent. You can't be a spouse. You can't be a friend. You can't be in anything in relationship unless you're willing to take your own self-interest and set it aside. As long as you cling to your own selfishness, you're going to be a lousy friend, a lousy spouse, a lousy parent, crummy kid. And that's what he says. Now he says, and we got to go, he said, I want you to enjoy life. Here's what I've seen, verse 18, here's what I've seen is good and fitting, to eat and drink and enjoy one's labor. But the only way that I can do that is in right relationship with Him. I can't do it under the sun apart from God. But just as you were thinking, oh, there's nothing more to say, 3 more weeks of plowing through this same thought. Because He isn't going to let us go until we say, you win, Solomon. I need God's perspective. Let's pray. Father, help us look at life this way, see things this way, live in a way where we have our eyes not on the things around us, but on You. God, I pray that we would understand that it's faith, family, and friends that ultimately matter. There's nothing wrong with stuff, but oh my golly, is it addictive. We'll never have enough. We'll never be satisfied. God, do this work in our heart. Help us live supernaturally. We pray to You in Christ's name. Amen.